Well, Patty, honestly, I'm not just saying this. This is one of the best episodes we've ever done in terms of one of the most important ones that we've ever done. I
agree. I agree. I thought it was so insightful. I mean, if you haven't stopped, if you're driving your car, you might even want to stop for a few minutes and listen to what VJ has to say, because it's the future of your business. If you're an ISO or an agent, and you're trying to future-proof your business, this is the episode that you really need to listen to.
I couldn't have said it better. And then in addition to that, so it's kind of like on the positive side, we talked to VJ, who owns NMI and Iris CRM, and talking about how they're coming together to try to help ISOs and agents be competitive with, Square and Toast and these others. Then we go to the biggest threat for our industry.
Right, which
you talk about. Explain that a little bit of what you talked about today.
Well, Senator Durbin is at it again. And, if you thought that debit interchange regulation was a nightmare, this is even worse. Yep. That's all I can say. But James and I talk about it, and you should definitely wait to stay tuned for that segment of the podcast.
Love it. Well, let's jump right into our interview with VJ and talk about these important topics.
Let's go.
Welcome to the Merchant Sales Podcast.
James Shepard here, and Patty with me, and we're going to interview our good friend VJ, who's the CEO of NMI, and also, of course, the sponsor of our podcast. So, VJ, welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
It's an honor.
So, we're very excited to talk about this topic of why should a merchant choose you, meaning the ISO, the agent, versus the PayFacs, the Stripes and Squares of the world that don't have this kind of direct agent model. And of course, VJ, this is a subject I know you're very passionate about. This is something that you guys, NMI is kind of on the forefront of that. And so I would just kind of really be curious to hear your thoughts initially on this. Where are we at in this saga of the payments industry? As we kind of have this ISO agent world, and then we have this PayFac, world as well. So how do you see this kind of current, world playing out in your mind?
Sure. So once again, thanks for having us on. We are at a time of tremendous change in the payments industry. And maybe I can answer your question by first giving some historical context.
Yeah.
So, if we go back in the day, a merchant had to get their own processing services, and the ISO model obviously was grown out of, we joke sometimes at NMI, it was two guys and a dog in a briefcase and maybe some Verifone terminals, and they would knock on the door of a merchant. And of course, then we had e-commerce, and then we had the advent of these all-in-one players. I think you referred to a couple of them, Stripe or Toast or Square, that made it really easy. And so what's happened is, it doesn't cut it just to say, do you need merchant processing services? You have to show up with a solution. And I think in our industry, and we are an enabler, so clearly we are selling tools or picks and shovels. We do not monetize payments. We don't take on risk. We are here to be a white label, behind the scenes provider to ISOs, ISVs, and we also service some of the bank channels as well. So let's just get to the crux of it. This is all about economics, right? Mm-hmm. There is a thing called the swipe fee, and the swipe fee is there in order to fund the entire industry that makes payments ubiquitous, easy to use, reliable, secure, and keep you away from fraudsters selling you goods that are unauthorized. So that swipe fee is going to be distributed to those who add value. And adding value is no longer enough to just say, do you need a merchant account? You have to package that merchant account with other solutions that are solving business problems for merchants.
Right.
Well, you brought up Toast and Square and the likes of those, these what I like to call interlopers. But, what are these like competitors, to the traditional ISO agent market or, industry? What's allowed them to grow and grab the market share they have? What's the competitive advantage that they bring?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think you can solve it with one term, which is UI UX, user interface, user experience, simplicity, easy to turn it on, fully integrated. Mm-hmm. And I think Mark Andreessen, one of the famous venture capitalists, he coined a phrase about 10, 15 years ago, and he said, "Software is eating the world." And truly enough, those folks that you named are eating the world, coming up with a full software stack.
Right.
However, there is a price to pay for something that's easy to use. you are now paying a premium for those services because those companies need to make money. And so if you're sitting in the ISO agent side of the house, what's your takeaway? There are two takeaways. One is there's money to be made because those guys are making it and they're sort of stealing my old lunch. Right. And the second one is you have to have a better user experience, user interface. And the two that you named are really only in the hospitality world. They don't go beyond that. Let's look at the entire economy, every MCC code that the ISOs that watch your podcast or that are in our industry. They service everything from nonprofit, all the way to hospitality, to medical, dental, and we could name probably 15 sub-industries. Right. So I think that what they need to learn from the so-called interlopers, I love that term, Patty, is to show up with a value-added solution. And so just selling payment processing is not enough. How can you combine it with other components that solve problems for your partners or your end merchants?
Yeah.
So let's do this, BJ, let's dive into the weeds a little bit. So let's talk about maybe a specific example, because I think it helps our industry to kind of see this. So I was thinking about, card not present, and specifically like home services. I've had a lot of experiences personally over the last couple of years. We just bought a house. Yes, I bring this up often on the podcast. Just by extreme frustration in dealing with these various home service providers, and the fact that they either don't take cards or they take it in the most inconvenient way or non-compliant way possible. Like, write your card number down on this piece of paper for me, and So when you think about them, and we kind of know what they need. Are they getting to a point where they want what they need, and what do these ISOs and agents need to be doing to go after a market like that maybe many of them haven't really gone after in a big way?
Yeah, let's dive into that one. And that's an area where we actually play a pretty big role as an enabler, is in field service. And let's just, go back and make it even more concrete on your example, and I'll make it very personal. So I live in, San Francisco, and I'm an avid cyclist. During COVID, we had a lot of break-ins, and it turned out that thieves had realized that cycles were very fungible goods. You could steal them and sell them really fast. And because of supply chain, you couldn't buy bikes. Some of these bikes are, a few $1,000s. So somebody broke into my garage, as in some of my neighbors, and they didn't actually end up stealing anything. They ran away because of the alarm. But I had to get a new garage door. So that was who I called, was a garage door installer company. And they explained to me that there's an IoT version now that connects to my app and my phone. And their most important thing is there's a bolt that locks the door. So when the thieves put the code, they drill a hole, they put the coat hanger, and they grab that emergency, that little piece of string, that rope, the bolt stops them. So, of course, I bought a new garage door. And this guy says to me, all right, how do you want to pay? Do you want to write down the credit card on a piece of paper? He can invoice me later? I mean, it was just a nightmare. And I realized that one of our clients has actually completely automated this process by having a full omni-channel experience. So here's what our partner has done. And I actually pointed this garage door installer to our partner. And he's now a customer of that ISO. I call it a next-gen ISO that has aggregated all of those services for appointment booking, the Yelp reviews, all of the full service, as well as payment. And so here's the critical thing, because you asked about card present. You need to be able to offer to someone like me card present. So pull out a little, maybe a little reader. In future, it'll just be the iPhone or the Android phone. Tap to pay instantly. Give me a URL link that you can send me via WhatsApp or iMessage, or what have you, or shoot me an email right now instantly.
Right.
And all of those things are modalities of payment. So you need to be able to take the payment online, in-app, with a card reader, with two phones tapping to each other, or any other such form, including QR codes. And we provide all of those solutions. So I would say that that's a great fertile ground for ISOs and ISV customers of ours to go after. We have a bunch of those, and some of them are doing billions of dollars of payment volume through our rails, and they didn't have to connect to any acquirers or issuers or processors, because we already pre-programmed with those.
Right. So I love this, and let's do one more rabbit trail, and then I have a kind of a broader question. Let's talk about retail for a second. So this is much more kind of hitting home with our audience. It's like, okay, we're going to walk into retail businesses. The direction obviously has been kind of point of sale and smart terminals and things of that nature. But frankly, a lot of these agents I talk to, they're telling me, James, I walk out of 60% of the ones I walk into because they have an integrated solution point of sale. Is this the direction? Any advice you have for the ISOs and agents to kind of like, how do we get our hooks in there and continue to grow in the retail space?
Yeah, so I think that, again, the ISO of old has now morphed into or evolved into the next gen ISO. And what is a next gen ISO? Everyone has a definition. We have a bunch of white papers, by the way, on our website on NMI.com about become a next gen ISO. And a next gen ISO is really somebody that is looking more like a software company. They are integrating different components of software. They usually have some software engineers on staff. And so you better get very tech savvy is my message to you. And so for those retailers, pick out a segment which is not dominated. Hospitality is so much the proverbial coffee shop. Maybe that's not such a good fishing ground, but go to a specialty retailer and integrate with the point of sale of the inventory system of that retailer. Integrate with the marketing automation platforms. And so you're going to have to start to stitch together different components to come up with a solution, and payment processing is in there. And I'd love to add just one more thing. We've seen some of our clients who are next gen ISOs that have gone after specific verticals and segments doing this, stitching together different pieces of software, easier to do today than it was 5 years ago and 10 years ago, because you can use APIs. And they are no longer charging for payment processing. They're doing interchange pass-through. And they make it up on a monthly subscription of the software stack they are selling. So they're almost in between your kind of Square, Toast, Stripe, all in one shop. And they're certainly not just selling merchant processing. And those next gen ISOs are super successful. A couple of them have just gotten multi-billion-dollar valuations. And I'm not allowed to name them because we're a white label provider, but we are powering their payment stack.
Yeah, I love that. So this is such a good segue. Let's zoom out a little bit, because I have two really important questions and topics here that I want to get your feedback on. So the first one is, the ISOs and agents that want to become this next gen ISO, but they don't have developers, they don't view themselves as a software company yet. So they may want to go out and talk to these point of sale providers, these software ISVs, and say, hey, we want to partner with you. We want to do the payments, you do the software. So obviously, in order to do that, I think NMI plays this super important role, because not only are you going to them and saying, well, we use NMI and you could integrate with their API so that we could sell for you, but also it's kind of like by integrating with NMI, you're kind of opening yourself up to this world of ISO agent that integrates. So talk about that kind of approach to the market. Is that something where you're seeing success, where ISOs and agents are leveraging NMI in that way to kind of create these partnerships with software companies where they do the processing and they tie this together with NMI? Talk about that approach.
Yeah, that is the fastest growing segment that we see. And so what happens is, let's go backward forward. 5 or 6, 7, 8 years ago, software company wants to monetize payments. The proverbial example is the yoga studio software company. I just say that because my wife is a yoga teacher, and all her payments come through her platform. And they could go to someone like a Stripe and pay their 2.9% and 30 cents, and it's great. And then you start to get bigger, and you're doing 5 million, 10 million, maybe $100 million of payment volume. And you're scratching your head going, maybe I should actually be making some money off of this payment flow. And so what we saw is a bunch of ISOs servicing that unmet need in the market, where you have the software vendor that says, how do I turn payments from a cost center to a profit center? And to turn it from a cost center to a profit center, it's complicated. We've had software companies knock on our door and they say, hey, what's this interchange thing? I want some of that. And we need to sit them down. And I'm a former, Visa guy. Well, interchange is not yours. Nobody can have it.
Right.
But we're not in a position to do the education. But the next gen super ISO aggregator is, and they can sit down the ISV and go, you can't have interchange, but there are other pieces of the swipe fee you can take. How much risk do you want to take? Do you want to be able to deal with chargebacks, or do you want us to deal with chargebacks? And those expert ISOs that are now targeting ISVs with the sales pitch of, you can go with Stripe, but you got two problems. One is they are a cost center, and two is, I will joke, they are the Hotel California of payments. You can check in, but you cannot check out. If you integrate to our API, which is being resold as the ISO's tech stack, nobody needs to know it's NMI. Our name doesn't appear anywhere.
Right.
You're connected to 160 processors. You can tell the ISV, you can sell you put some of your processing through First Data, some through Global Payments, some through WorldPay, and now you can start to have leverage and negotiation of how many basis points are you going to make. And I started this podcast off saying, at the end of the day, it's all about economics.
Right.
And so we are giving people an ability to take a cost center, turn it into a profit center, and facilitate the sharing of economics. That is taking off like a rocket ship.
Yeah.
So my next question, and this is maybe a little bit of left field, but I'm just really curious to get your thoughts on this. So even just since we had talked last, I've just had so many experiences dealing with these software companies that are doing the payments themselves, who genuinely want to become an ISO. It's this really interesting, like, kind of reverse process. Like, we think of the ISO needs to become the next gen ISO, like the ISO needs to become the tech company. More and more I'm seeing that the tech company is saying, well, if the ISOs aren't going to provide great tech for the agents to sell, we'll become the ISO. And so I guess my question to you is, as you see the market playing out, and I know you have all these different kind of, you have so many different kinds of organizations you work with. You work with the ISVs, you work with the ISOs, you work with the next gen ISO. So how do you see this playing out? Is the market going to shift to more towards verticalization of the software company has everything, and so they're integrating the payments and the software, and they do everything, and they have the agent channel? Or are you seeing a lot of or are you seeing a lot of the ISOs that want to stick to payments, but they're developing these really strong relationships with tech companies, so they have the agent distribution and they're using the software company? Like, how do you see this playing out over the next 3 to 5 years? I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, you really articulated it well. We actually have a convergence, almost like a collision course,
Yes,
in the ISVs, saying, well, if I want to, again, go back to take it from a cost center to profit center, if it means that I have to become an ISO, okay, I'll become an ISO. It depends how much pressure they have for trying to monetize the payment flow. And we're telling the ISOs, hey, become a next gen ISO, which is really more of a tech savvy, oriented merchant processing stack that goes after ISVs. What I am seeing is it's lopsided. It's not even, because at the end of the day, all of the software companies, they are really good at servicing their software segment. So the field service guys that I talked about, they know all about garage door installers and plumbers and electricians. And they kind of you ask them about AML and KYC and anti-money laundering terrorist, lists and OFAC checks, and their head starts to explode because they're trying to figure out, where's the next bicycle theft city for garage door installers to go after. And so the balance is tipped. Most software companies, 8 out of 10 that we talk to, say, ooh, that's too complicated. I'm really good at laundromats, or I have become the expert in fly fishing stores. Can you refer me to somebody that can help me monetize payments? But that complexity, it's too big and it's out of my wheelhouse and it's not part of my DNA. So I think this is a great opportunity for the ISOs who become next gen, because you have the advantage. The software companies don't want to become payments experts, period. Help them monetize, share some of the economics, and you'll be in a great position.
Yeah, that's really cool.
That's very interesting data. And again, I think what's interesting about it too is, not only are we talking about the complexity of integrating the payment processing into the software and all that goes into that, but I'm also even talking about the distribution, right? And so the good news there would be, if software companies really do kind of want to generally play in their sandbox, and they're saying, okay, the ISOs, you have all these independent agents that are out there, we don't want to mess with that. Those are big opportunities for the ISOs to continue to develop those partnerships to bring not only payments, but potentially distribution to the partnership. So that
I love where you're going with that, James, because the ISOs are by their nature sales organizations.
Right.
They are experts in selling stuff. Right. And so if they do hook up with a field service software company, for example, that may be going to make it up, Seattle-based, Pacific Northwest-based, they may say, hey, we have distribution in Nashville, or we have distribution in the Chicagoland area. They can actually help them get to those places. Mm-hmm. And we are already seeing that happen. And I just want to throw one other thing. Terminology is really messing us up here. We have terms that came out of the credit card industry from 30 to 40 to 50 years ago. Right. And we don't live in a black and white world anymore. Right. So CPCNP, what the heck does card present even mean?
Right.
I mean, I'm saying,
at the time you don't even have a card.
Right. It's customer present. And that thing of CP, CNP, and what is it? Modo, mail order, telephone order.
Like, who uses that?
I mean, but essentially, we still have those terms because they're part of the Visa MasterCard rule books. And the same goes for ISO, non-ISO, wholesale ISO. Right. These terms are really trying to simplify something that's not out there. What I like about what you said on distribution is, let's focus on economics and the ability to distribute. There is a ton of opportunity here for the ISO market.
Yeah, I really think one of the biggest challenges is going to be, can the ISOs pivot to where their distribution is verticalized? Like, can they actually get good at working with this huge sales team to say, let's focus on selling garage door companies. Let's focus on selling this vertical because that's going to be necessary, I think, as well. So we could go on talking about that for another hour. Let's move. So
Can I wanted to just bring up something that's a little bit off topic, but I know we've discussed this in the past, James, about the acquisition of Iris.
Yes.
As we discussed, James and I saw this as a perfect move, obviously, for you all. But I'm curious about your vision in terms of how you see the modern ISO scaling up in this new world of payments by leveraging Iris and NMI.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. We are so excited of having brought Iris and NMI together. So for those who don't maybe know Iris too much, Iris is a CRM software, customer relationship management software that allows you to manage all of your merchants from the full life cycle of prospecting a merchant when you were looking to land them, all the way through to when you onboarded them with a processor, and then right through to residuals and commissions and chargebacks and reporting. So we call it a CRM, but it's really an ERP for an ISO.
Right.
And the founder story is Dimitri Akrin, the founder, who's the president of president of Iris, was an ISO at the age of 16. He was an agent, and he couldn't find software that could help him manage his business. Then he started his own ISO, and then he developed the Iris system. So he really knows what the pain points are. And so in and of itself, Iris was already integrated to NMI and to AuthorizeNet and other gateways because they are agnostic.
Right.
And the reason why we brought it together, we are a Switzerland-like company. If you go with the metaphor, we are fully neutral. So is Iris, and we will continue to be neutral. Iris will work with other gateways, and we will continue to work with other CRMs. But the two work better together. And the breakthrough here is that if you prospect a merchant, land them, onboard them, get them in, type it in, we are going to be releasing very soon the ability to instantly turn on the merchant account in NMI without any work. It happens in seconds.
Wow.
So that you can have a straight through processing. And Patty asked me about the vision. The vision is to have an instant onboarding experience as delightful as some of the interlopers you mentioned. With processor choice and flexibility.
Right.
So imagine having an instant onboarding experience from merchant prospecting to turning it on for processing, having multiple processors, having multiple mids in a multi-mid hierarchy, and you get to choose who you want to send those transactions to. You can change that real time, and you can start monetizing payments. That's a kabang, boom kind of concept. It'll take us a few years to get there, but the first steps are already in market.
I love it. And, it's funny to give our audience a little context. Right before we started the interview, VJ and I were talking about this because I had sent him a note saying, hey, I probably can't bring this up, but I really think the best thing NMI and Iris could do together is improve the onboarding experience.
Right. That's kind of why I brought up the question.
Yeah. And so, that's fantastic.
I just want to tell a funny joke there because, we have this great NMI gateway with this fantastic onboarding experience, white labeled. The merchant, makes it look like it's James Shepard and Patty Murphy Corp. And it doesn't work until you type them in. And you've got people that are getting VAR sheets, and they are sheets. They're pieces of paper that have been printed out, and they have numbers on them. And then you go into this one console, it's super modern, and you go to this other console, and you type it in. Really? In 2022, you're printing out two pieces of paper, and you're typing them into each other. Right. We got to just end that forever. And that's really our vision behind this.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so crucial. And I think, again, to break this down for our audience a little bit so they understand, these software companies that Patty, again, coined as the interlopers that have come in, one of the big things about them that is so nice is the idea of creating a merchant account and then being able to use that card acceptance within the context of the software is that it all happens like you fill out a few web forms and you're good to go instantly or near instant. And versus in our kind of disjointed world, we have, I got to sign them up with my ISO who works with NMI, and then I got to get the VAR sheet from the ISO who got it from the acquiring bank, and then I have to key it into NMI, and then I got to configure it, and so there's a lot of additional steps. And so I think what I hear you saying, VJ, is that with this acquisition of Iris, since Iris is already integrated with most of these acquiring banks and large processors as far as the underwriting department, all of that, and then we have NMI, which is kind of this ability to process the payments on the front end, you're saying you're going to have kind of this seamless flow, and the ISO is going to be able to build this kind of really convenient sign-up process. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah, boy, I got to record that because you described it much better than I have. But that was exactly the idea. And our longer-term vision at NMI is something we call full commerce enablement. And what we mean by that is we have a tagline internally. We call it, I'll make it public now. We call it from sign up to payout. We want to be able to provide you with the entire enablement tech stack. So you don't have to worry about this from the time you sign up a merchant, turn them on for processing instantly, all the way through to payout. So MasterCard Send, think Visa Direct, think gig economy payouts, all your ACH. And when we have that full stack, well, now you have a white label version of what is now trendily called embedded finance.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I like it. And I think what's interesting is, the importance of what you're saying right now. I hope that our audience is understanding, because I legitimately believe that without a player in the industry that creates what you just described, I think that the ISO agent world is going to really have significant struggle to compete, because again, over time, there is just so much to gain by having this seamless sign-up process. As somebody that owns a couple software companies, I can tell you that it is a really, really big deal. And so I think the ISOs and agents, they really need that relationship with Iris and NMI, if for no other reason, just to have some resources and power in their corner to help them compete. And really go that direction. So again, we could have another conversation here for a couple hours. I won't do that. So give us some information for those who want to know more. VJ, where would you send them to learn more about NMI and Iris, and give us a little bit of context there of what they should do to learn more about you?
Sure. So, I'll give the usual standard answer first, and I'll give you more detail. Obviously, at nmi.com, our website, just 3 letters, easy to type. We have all kinds of resources, including white papers on becoming a next-gen ISO, and really detailing more than what we talked about here, kind of on an introductory basis. And the other one is, just inform yourself. One of the things that we're really proud of at NMI, we're a small company. We're about 400 people today, but we like to say we punch above our weight class. So we process over $200 billion payment volume, about 400,000 merchants on the platform. We have about 3,000 partners. They're kind of a mixture between ISOs and ISVs, very heavily skewed to the ISO community. And we still want the industry as a whole to grow. We are not about taking market share in a shrinking pie. The pie is growing and getting bigger and bigger. Remember, e-commerce is only 14% of the economy. It's tiny.
Right.
So come to us, listen to the podcast like you guys have, other resources in the industry, ETA. And if anyone wants to reach out to me, personally, that's really easy to do. My email is just my first name dot last name at nmi.com. And we will be very happy to take your questions, but inform yourself, talk to our competitors, find out what else is out there, because we believe if the community does well, we all do well.
Yeah.
Love it. Love it. VJ, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for being the sponsor of the podcast. We really appreciate that. And again, thank you so much for the time and the insights that you shared.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
And I echo James's comments. Thank you very much.
Take care. Goodbye.
And now, here is questions from the field with James Shepard.
So Patty, I just wanted to do a quick follow-up today in questions from the field, because I think that the interview that VJ just gave, I'm going to really promote that one, because it's so important to our industry that we just don't seem to understand. I don't even think how important this is, because the agent or, the merchant onboarding experience is the number one pain point for agents. It's the number one pain point for the merchants, and it's the number one pain point for the software companies. All three of them share the exact same pain point now.
Right. And it's like, if you address that pain point, you basically take all the friction out of the system.
You do. And again, what, VJ alluded to there is, and why I wanted to kind of do a separate segment on this is, no matter what Iris and NMI create, ultimately, there's still going to be a little bit of a time friction potentially, because the underwriting department at the acquiring bank or the processor, the FSP, whatever it is, they are going to have to approve the deal. And I really believe that this is an area that just has not gotten enough focus. And I'll tell you what's interesting to me. I was thinking about this earlier, Patty. I won't name names because we don't do that. But I'm telling you, when you look at the companies that seem to just dominate agent recruiting and activation and deal flow, with almost without exception, they have a huge focus on merchant onboarding.
Yeah.
And they're able to do instant onboarding for a vast majority of deals, instant approval, I should say, not instant onboarding, but instant approval. And so that's really, really important. And so I think what needs to happen is our listeners, we need to start putting pressure as a group. If you're an ISO listening to this, you need to reach out to your acquirer and say, hey, I heard what NMI and Iris are doing about this whole, moving towards instant onboarding. Are you working with them yet? Right? And saying, what are you doing how are you going to bring the turnaround time for underwriting down significantly? How are you going to streamline the criteria and reduce the amount of, headaches and red tape that we have to go through in order to get a merchant account approved? So it is such a pain point, again, for, these software companies, because again, these software companies, what they want is they want people to just sign up.
Right.
They already have a sign up form and they just want to add 3 more forms, in a row. And then it's like, now you're signed up for the software and you have the merchant processing and it all works and it's all integrated and you're ready to go. And so you have to be able to bring that to these software companies, or maybe don't have to right now, but you will have to in 2 or 3 years in order to get these deals done. So I just kind of wanted to take a minute to echo that. I talked a little bit more about this in a previous episode, but I wanted to take a second to echo what VJ said and to say that, this is make or break for our industry. We have to get underwriting. We have to do it right. It has to be easy for the merchant to sign up. It has to be super easy for the sales agent to make a sale and get what they need. And so I think all of that, unfortunately, there's just not been nearly enough attention paid to that. And as a result, there hasn't been enough pressure put on the main companies in order to kind of bring it to pass.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. If you're not benefiting from this, which probably you are not, you need to really put the pressure out there.
Yeah. So that's it for me today, Patty. Short one, but I just wanted to bring that up and make sure people are noticing the importance of this, putting pressure on their acquiring bank, putting pressure on their processor to improve underwriting and remove some of this friction. And then again, so that we can work with companies like Iris and NMI that are really trying to do some cool processor agnostic stuff, but that still is not going to be possible, unless there's that cooperation that exists. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about, what they have. So.
Good stuff. Thanks, James.
This is the Insider's Report with Patty Murphy.
James, I have a report about Senator Dick Durbin. We all know that Senator Durbin is the Illinois Democrat who authored legislation, more than a decade ago, that ushered in debit card interchange caps.
Yep.
And I'm not one to gloat, but I think I remember a few months ago saying he was going to strike again, and he has.
Yes.
And he's not going it alone. He has recruited at least one Republican, Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas, to co-sponsor what he's calling the Credit Card Competition Act.
Yes.
Now, you may recall in April, Durbin was among a group of Democrats and Republicans who wrote Visa and MasterCard, urging them to hold off on their planned interchange rate hikes. About a month later, he held a hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee, which he chairs. And he lashed out at the 2 card companies and labeled them a duopoly, which is probably true. And at the time, he offered a wish list of actions he wanted, to see taken to inject more competition into the market. Well, as the name implies, the Credit Card Competition Act addresses some of these, and one in particular, merchant choice. And it would apply to card issuing banks with over 100 billion in assets. And it would call upon the Federal Reserve to issue regulations that provide merchants the ability to choose which networks their card payments get routed through. And they must be able to choose from at least 2 networks, one of which is not operated by Visa or MasterCard. We talked about this in the past about how the debit routing, remember?
Yes.
And I thought at the time, maybe something like that would come out, but actually this is much more comprehensive. It for debit and credit cards.
Right.
Not surprisingly, the bill has, wide support from business groups, including, which I thought was notable, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, which actually, put a quote in the press release that Durbin sent out. And of course, it's opposed by banks and their lobbyists.
Right.
But, Durbin and Marshall, what I think is interesting is that, and we've talked about this in the past as well, they're positioning this as a debate between support for small business or big business. And here's what Marshall said. He said, when it comes to Main Street versus Wall Street, I'll choose Main Street every time. Convenience stores, gas stations, and other small businesses in Kansas are being taken advantage of by Visa and MasterCard on behalf of the big banks in New York City at a time when they and their communities they serve are grappling with crippling inflation and staring down the barrel of a looming recession. It's gone on long enough. Competition is the heartbeat of capitalism, and that is what our bill will create, competition.
Yeah,
Durbin said something similar, and he basically said that not only will it, will inject competition through what we consider, in terms of network competition, but he also sees it as opening the door to new market entrants, like debit-only networks to expand their reach. And I'll be honest, I've watched the legislative, battles for years. I don't think this is going to pass anytime soon.
Yeah.
But I see it as a type of legislation, which I think I've mentioned to you in the past. When you have a big piece of legislation, like the coronavirus, the CARES Act, for example, right? It becomes a Christmas tree. You can adorn it with all these other pieces of legislation that you have in your hip pocket. This is something that's going to end, I think, will be passed that way.
Yeah, I honestly feel like if Durbin would have started on it earlier, he probably would have tried to get it through with the Inflation Fighting
Reduction Act.
Because it would have been a fit for that.
Well, it was a fit, and I actually was watching out for that to see if that happened. Surprisingly.
Well, so I'll share my 2 cents on it. First of all, I think it's horrible for our industry.
Sure.
It's terrifying. And I'll tell you why, because it's not big business versus small business at all. In fact, big businesses are going to benefit from this massively more than small businesses.
Yep.
In fact, almost to the exclusion of the small business. So the thing our listeners have to understand is when Patty is saying the merchant can choose between these various networks. Well, in the eyes of Visa, MasterCard, and legislation, when you say the merchant, we're actually talking about the acquiring bank.
Right.
So we're actually talking about, TSYS can choose where they want to route the transaction. So the problem with all of this is ultimately this is a very slippery slope. And so this initial legislation, while it may not be that big of a deal to our industry, meaning, okay, interchange is going to be lower. Well, that'll be nice. Well, yeah, but the problem is the whole purpose of this is to lower the cost for the small business. And when the regulators and legislators realized that actually all they did was give Walmart and Amazon an enormous cost break, and instead small business owners are still paying the same because they're not on interchange plus pricing anymore. They're flat rate. Do you think Square is going to instantly reduce their pricing because interchange goes down?
Nope.
No, they're going to have the most profitable 4 quarters of their existence.
Yeah.
And then they're going to lower prices by 10 basis points.
Yeah.
So the reality of the industry is that small businesses are not going to benefit from this. And as usual, the Senate and the House seems to have very little idea of how business actually is working in a particular vertical. And so I think this is a horrible thing it's not going to help small business owners. And I think it's a horrible thing for our industry because the slippery slope is going to be, well, now we need to regulate credit card processors. And we need to put a cap and say, well, you can't mark up X amount. And so all of a sudden now we're moving very rapidly towards this regulation. So I am not in favor of it. I think it's a horrible idea right now. And I have said for a long time that there were things that I think that should be done. This is going to be a nightmare in implementation, just like the Pandemic Network thing was. It has not worked out well.
It has not worked out well at all.
It's kind of like saying we're demanding that competitors come forth and compete with Visa and MasterCard, even though they're massively larger and have, it's like, what are we saying exactly? The federal government's trying to mandate the creation of competitors. They're not saying they're going to split them up like they did with, say, the Baby Bells or something. They're not, it just doesn't make any sense. And so I am not in favor at all. I think it's horrible for now. I think it's much worse for later. And again, I agree with you that I don't think it has much of a chance of passing, but I think that we're seeing so much innovation right now around this idea of interchange and these neobanks that are starting and banking as a service and just all these innovative, creative things that are happening around this kind of what we thought was this very solid foundational infrastructure of interchange.
Yeah.
And now the Senate's about to say, well, we might pull the rug out from under you at some point on that.
Right.
So now all these companies that are going to build their whole business model around the interchange revenue are now saying, well, wait a minute, can we do
Wait
that?
a minute. Yeah. But I think in another way too, James, this is an opportunity for groups like the ETA to really prove their worth.
Yes, I agree.
This is the time that Congress really needs to be educated about this business.
I agree.
I mean, we all know we can't even explain our business to our family half the time, right?
Right.
I think that, if the ETA wants to earn its money, that's what it should be doing, is up there educating lawmakers about how the system works and why legislation like this would not work.
Yeah, I agree. And again, I think too, to clarify, and I'm on record many, many times in this podcast as having said that I believe Visa and MasterCard have anti-competitive practices, that interchange is too high relative to other countries. And so I'm not in any way saying nothing should be done. I'm just saying
this is not the thing to do.
This is not the thing to do. This is going to be a nightmare.
Nightmare. I mean, if you thought that the Durbin Amendment was a nightmare, this is like the one that you're going to wake up screaming from.
Yeah, this is or it's the one you don't wake up from. I'm not sure.
That's a possibility too, right?
In our industry, So anyway, I really appreciate you bringing it up and sharing, and I'm sure we'll be talking a lot more about it in the months to come.
I'm sure we will.
So thank you, Patty. Great stuff.
Sure.
Thank you for listening to the Merchant Sales Podcast. Whether you are an industry veteran, processing executive, or just trying to learn about the payment space, we appreciate your time. The Merchant Sales Podcast is a joint production of Greensheet.com and ccsalespro.com, and we hope you will tune in next week for more information and tips on building your merchant services business.